600 years ago, if you wanted sugar, you didn't walk to a cupboard, you walked to an apothecary. Because sugar wasn't sold as food, it was sold in small, expensive amounts, treated closer to medicine than dessert, kept under lock in wealthy households that could afford it at all. Today, it's in your coffee, your bread, your salad dressing, your kid's snack, often without you even noticing it's there. The distance between those two realities isn't just economic, it's neurological, and understanding it explains a craving most people have never fully been able to shake. To answer that honestly, we're going in 3 parts. Part 1. Why your brain is built to crave sweetness at all, and why that craving used to be one of the smartest things about you, not the weakest. Part 2. What actual scientists find when they test that craving directly in labs on brains, and where even they still disagree with each other about the word addiction. Part 3. How that ancient wiring collided with a world where sugar stopped being rare and started being everywhere, engineered specifically to keep pulling you back. Let's start at the beginning. Long before sugar, long before humans. Somewhere in your evolutionary past, deep enough that human doesn't even apply yet, being able to detect sweetness fast was the difference between finding a real meal and wasting energy on something that wouldn't sustain you. Ripe fruit means sugar. Sugar means fast, usable energy. And in a world with no fridges, no farms, no guaranteed next meal, an animal that could taste sweetness from a distance, crave it, and chase it down had a real advantage over one that couldn't. That instinct didn't fade out with evolution, it got installed at the hardware level. Humans, along with the rest of the primate family, carry a pair of genes called TAS1R2 and TAS1R3 that build the receptors on your tongue specifically tuned to detect sweetness. This isn't a modern feature, it's ancient, shared, and remarkably consistent across species that split apart millions of years ago. But detecting sweetness is only half the story. The other half happens deeper in the brain, and it's the part that actually explains the reach for seconds. When something sweet hits your tongue, your brain releases dopamine, the same signaling chemical involved in essentially every reward circuit in your nervous system, including the one studied heavily in addiction research. Dopamine doesn't just make something feel good in the moment. Its real job is to teach you to repeat the behavior that triggered it. Less a reward in the simple sense, more an instruction. Remember exactly how you got this and do it again. So here's the reframe worth sitting with. That pull you feel towards something sweet isn't the flaw layered on top of an otherwise disciplined brain. It's some of the oldest, most efficient survival machinery you own, doing exactly the job it was built to do. You're not weak for wanting more. You're running code that kept your ancestors alive. That's part 1 answered. Now for the part where scientists actually tried to break that code open. If this system is ancient, useful, and finely tuned, why does it now, in 2026, feel less like a survival tool and more like something closer to compulsion? Researchers didn't just theorize about this, they tested it directly. And the first place they tested it wasn't on humans at all. It was tested on rats. Picture the setup. A rat in a cage gets access to sugar water, but not constantly, on a schedule. Some hours it's there, some hours it's gone by. Within days, researchers led by neuroscientist Nicole Avena documented something that reads uncomfortably close to human behavior. When the sugar showed up, the rats didn't sip it, they binged, consuming far more than they would if it were simply left out all the time. And when it was taken away on schedule, they didn't just move on. They showed agitation, anxiety-like pacing, the kind of response you'd expect from an animal missing something its brain had already started depending on. That result alone doesn't prove humans are addicted to sugar. Rats aren't people, and a lab cage isn't a kitchen. But it was enough to send researchers looking at human brains next. And when they did, using imaging technology that tracks which regions activate in real time, they found something worth pausing on. Highly palatable, sugar-rich food lights up overlapping regions of the brain's reward circuitry, including a region called the nucleus accumbens that also activates in response to certain addictive drugs. Not identical, not equal in intensity, but overlapping in a way that's hard to write off as coincidence. Here's where this stops being a lab curiosity and starts being a real-world number. Public health guidelines generally recommend keeping added sugar under about 6 teaspoons a day for the average adult, roughly 25 grams, for the strongest protective benefit. Multiple public health estimates put the average person in industrialized countries well above that, often by double or more. That gap isn't trivial. It's tracked directly against rising rates of obesity and type 2 diabetes across entire populations. So at this point, the story seems settled. Ancient reward system, modern overload, overlapping brain activity. Case closed. Except, and this is the part that almost never makes it into the headline, a meaningful number of scientists working directly in this field don't actually agree that sugar addiction is the right term. Sugar addiction is not a recognized clinical diagnosis. It doesn't appear as its own category in the standard psychiatric diagnostic manual. And researchers like Johannes Hebebrand have argued, in published work pushing back on this exact framing, that what we're really looking at is better described as eating addiction, a broader compulsive relationship with highly engineered, highly palatable food in general, rather than something sugar does entirely on its own, isolated from everything else it's usually eaten with. In other words, the villain might not be sugar by itself. It might be what sugar becomes once it's combined, engineered, and made endlessly available. That's part 2. Now, part 3, because that distinction is about to matter a lot more than it sounds like it should. If it's not sugar in isolation, what is it? To answer that, we need to leave the lab completely and go look at how sugar actually got into everything in the first place, because for almost all of human history, that wasn't the case at all. For most of the time humans have existed, sugar in any concentrated form was genuinely hard to get. Sweetness came from wild fruit during short seasonal windows, or from honey, which meant risking an entire defended hive for a payoff that was rare and expensive to obtain. There was no daily dessert. Sweetness was something you occasionally earned. That began to change with agriculture. Sugarcane was first domesticated in the highlands of New Guinea roughly 8,000 to 10,000 years ago, and later in ancient India, someone worked out how to boil cane juice down into a solid, storable crystal, turning a substance that used to spoil fast into something you could ship, store, and sell across entire trade networks. For centuries after that, though, sugar stayed a luxury. In medieval Europe, it was sold in small amounts by apothecaries, treated closer to medicine than food, locked away in the households that could afford it at all. For an ordinary person, sweetness was still, functionally, rare. Then came the part of the story that actually explains the modern flood. Beginning in the 1600s and accelerating hard through the 1700s, European powers built massive sugarcane plantations across the Caribbean, run almost entirely on forced and enslaved labor, an entire economic system organized around producing one crop at a human cost most of the people eventually consuming it back home never had to witness or reckon with. Historian Sidney Mintz, in his landmark study Sweetness and Power, documented how this system pushed sugar from an occasional luxury into a mass daily commodity across Britain within roughly a single century. Sit with the actual scale of that shift for a second. Tens of thousands of years of scarcity, fruit seasons, guarded hives, locked apothecary cabinets, and then, in barely 200 or 300 years, essentially none of that. A blink on the timescale your brain's reward system was actually built across. Your dopamine system never got the memo that the rules had changed. And it gets more deliberate than just sugar became available. Investigative journalist Michael Moss spent years reporting inside the food industry and documented something companies don't usually advertise: internal research dedicated to finding what's often called the bliss point, the exact concentration of sugar or sugar combined with fat and salt calculated to maximize craving without ever fully satisfying it. Think about what that actually looks like on a shelf. A cereal engineered so the sweetness hits early and fades fast, priming you to want another bowl before you finish the first one. A soda formulated so your mouth from ever feeling done. These aren't accidents of recipe. They're the product of taste testing panels, repeat purchase data, and formulation teams working specifically to find the exact point that keeps you coming back, without ever tipping into too sweet, which is the one thing that would make you stop. This isn't a conspiracy theory. It's documented industry research aimed squarely at the same dopamine pathway we talked about earlier, except this time it's not evolution doing the aiming. It's a product team. So layer it together. You inherited a reward system built for a world of rare, hard-won sweetness. That world quietly disappeared over the last few centuries, and what replaced it wasn't neutral. It was actively engineered, tested, and refined to trigger that exact ancient response as often and as intensely as possible. That's not a coincidence colliding with your biology. That's a target being aimed at it. So back to the real question, is sugar addictive? The honest answer isn't yes and it isn't no. Your craving for sweetness is genuinely ancient, genuinely adaptive, and was never a personal weakness to begin with. What changed isn't your willpower. What changed is that the scarcity which used to keep that craving in check disappeared, and in its place is an environment built on purpose to trigger it again and again. The craving is old, the access is new. That gap is where almost everything else about sugar and your body lives. Which brings you back to that empty wrapper, the clean plate, the pull behind your teeth telling you there should be more. That's not a failure of character showing up in you. That's a few million years of finely tuned survival instinct meeting a world that finally has an unlimited answer to a want it was never designed to fully satisfy. The reach for one more piece was never really about the piece. If you made it to the end of this one, you're exactly who this channel is built for. People who want to understand what's actually running underneath their everyday habits, not just be told to have more willpower. We put out videos like this every week, digging into the ancient wiring still shaping how you live now. If you want more of that, subscribing helps more than you'd think. It's free, and it tells the algorithm this kind of story is worth putting in front of more people. See you on the next one.